Hi, everybody. My name is Greg Katz, and welcome to Tuesday's edition of WeAreSC.com's Inside the Trojans Huddle, where we tell it like it is. Friends, Inside the Trojans Huddle is a game-like panel discussion that is posted Tuesdays in the off-season and twice during the regular season. The huddle features WeAreSC columnists, staff writers, and historians. We start off first with the pregame show, where we introduce our panel members for this edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, then give you the latest USC football news. Now let's meet Tuesday's panelists. A WeAreSC columnist who writes WeAreSC.com's The Monday Morass, Yay or Nay, and Sunday Takeaways, in addition to regular season football and basketball reports. He also hosts his own podcast show entitled Locked On USC, Marc Kulkin. A former William Jewell College defensive back and WeAreSC columnist who writes the popular WeAreSC.com column Musings with Arledge, and his own weekly WeAreSC.com video show, Musings with Arledge Solo Edition, and he's a graduate of the USC Law School, Chris Arledge. And a programming note this week on Musings with Arledge Solo Edition, Chris interviews two of the USC Polamalu family, former USC players and coach Kennedy Polamalu, and former Trojan safety Isaiah Polamalu. And of course, the editor-in-chief of WeAreSC.com, columnist, national recruiting guru, and a graduate of USC. That's Erik McKinney. And finally, a weekly WeAreSC columnist who writes Fridays the Obvious, Not So Obvious, IMHO Sunday, and is an active member of the Football Writers Association of America. Your moderator and producer of Inside the Trojans Huddle, Greg Katz. Before we kick off this Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle, here's a recap in USC football news. On Monday afternoon, Long Beach, California, Millikan High School, four-star wide receiver Ryan Pellum committed to USC. The 5'11", 170-pound athlete selected the Trojans over the Oregon Ducks. Last week, the Trojans also received a class of 2024 commitment from four-star offensive lineman Jason Zandermilla from Clearwater, Florida. Zandermilla, 6'3", 285, picked the Trojans over the Florida State Seminoles. And FYI, the Trojans are done with the June visitations, as it were, as the July recruiting dead period is now upon us. The Trojans continue to ascend in a torrid pace on the On3 national rankings and are currently number 6 in the country. In the latest rankings behind in order, Georgia, Ohio State, Florida, Alabama, Michigan, and Notre Dame. The Trojans continue to climb in the On3 Big Ten class of 2014 rankings. The men of Troy are now ranked number 3 in the On3's Big Ten rankings behind Ohio State and Michigan, having leapfrogged over Penn State. And a reminder that the recruiting division of WeAreSC.com, headed by Scott Schrader and assisted by Marshall Levinson, can be read daily during the week on our premium subscribers board. And don't forget to watch the Friday WeAreSC.com video show, the Roundup recruiting show with hosts Dylan Brazier and Scott Schrader. Friends, WeAreSC's Inside the Trojans Huddle greatly appreciates your viewer and listenership. We encourage those of you watching on sites like YouTube to click on the red subscriber button and like button. It's greatly valued and it's free. You can also listen to Inside the Trojans Huddle on many available podcast sites. And a reminder, WeAreSC.com is offering all USC premium content for $9.99 for 1 month or $99.99 for 1 year. With that, let's kick this thing off. First half panel, one of the big recruiting stories making the rounds involves USC and Oklahoma. It appeared at one time that the nation's #1 running back for the class of 2024, Taylor Tatum from Longview, Texas, was headed for USC after a recent visit to Oklahoma. The football, baseball prep star prospect may have switched his order from USC to Oklahoma in the top spot. Let's discuss the situation. What should the Trojans do if Tatum decides to commit to Oklahoma? We'll lead off as we normally do here on Inside the Trojans Huddle with Marc Kulkin. Marc, what's going on? What's going to happen? What do the Trojans do if Tatum decides at some point he's going to Oklahoma?
Go back to the drawing board and kind of figure out where they missed the message that baseball was really important to the guy. Look, I spoke to someone over the last few days who said, this is kind of a really unique situation as far as, Taylor Tatum's I don't want to say flip-flopping from USC to Oklahoma, but in essence, USC felt so strongly in their position with him that, Nate Palmer kind of got the message to commit to TCU as quickly as possible. Nate Frazier kind of got the message a long time ago, the modern day running back, that USC had higher priorities than him. So now USC has to go back to the drawing board and say, all right, well, we didn't get Taylor. We shot for the best guy out there, which you want them to do. But how do you repair the communication, the messaging with the other running backs that you were recruiting? Or do you just go in a completely different direction with guys who maybe you showed interest in, but you kind of said, well, let's see how things play out down the line. Or, there's always the transfer portal. If they want to have a second running back in this class, let's not forget, Brian Jackson is pretty darn good. USC had a couple of freshmen that opened eyes during spring camp in Quentin Joyner and Marion Peterson. So at this point, Taylor Tatum is a want. He's not a need. So yeah, there's a little bit of disappointment, but as far as what does USC do, they have options. It's just not their first option, or maybe even their second option.
Chris, your take.
Well, I'm kind of bummed out because I had heard that Tatum was possibly swinging to OU, but listening to Kulkin talk right now, it sounds like all is lost. And maybe it is. I don't know. Look, USC doesn't need to have a second back in order to have enough bodies. They don't. You have the two freshmen. You have Jackson. You have a kid you pulled out of modern day the year before that we were all pretty excited about, who can play in the backfield. Maybe not an every down back, but he can play there. And you can always pull somebody out of the portal. So there's no reason to panic if they can't get a guy that they really want. They're better off just waiting. There's no reason to pull in a guy just to have a body at that spot. Does this mean they messed up if Nate Palmer was willing to accept and they liked Palmer and they slow played him in order to get Tatum? I mean, not necessarily. Maybe if Nate Palmer turns out to be an All-American, then they did. But if he turns out to be a really good player that they can replace with somebody else, then okay. So I just don't. I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing. I've said on this show before, there's no such thing as a must-get recruit at USC. That it does not exist. And so if they don't get Tatum and they decide they're going to pass and just wait, maybe pull somebody out of the portal or pick up two backs next year, that's perfectly okay to me. I doubt if Tatum is the difference between a national title team and a team that's not. I just don't think that's likely to be the case. And it's not anything. I don't mean that to derogate Tatum. I think he's probably a fantastic player. It's just in football, that's usually not the case, that one running back is going to make that kind of difference. So whatever happens, happens. I'd love to get him, but if they don't, then I doubt if Lincoln Riley is going to lose a ton of sleep over it. USC will be fine.
Erik, exploding cigar, self-inflicted wound, trust a kid trying to make a decision at the expense of others. How do you interpret it?
It's recruiting. Other teams have coaches too, right? Other teams have recruiting plans for people. That there's a strong connection between Taylor Tatum's dad and Oklahoma coaches. There's a strong connection between Taylor Tatum and the Oklahoma baseball coach. Like, Oklahoma has a lot going for it, for Oklahoma recruits, for Texas recruits. That's a draw. Oklahoma gets good players to go to school there. This isn't losing a running back to Ball State from a Southern California kid, right? That's not kind of what this is. So you're going to go up against recruiting battles that are tough to win. Now, what I will say with recruiting now is it's a little bit like this wave that you need to crest when you get an official visit. If you get a kid like Tatum, a big time kid, on an official visit, and you start generating that momentum, you need that wave to crest into a commitment. Every day that it sort of ebbs back out to sea, you're kind of less and less likely to be able to capitalize on that momentum you built. So Oklahoma had that. And now if he's not in a rush to jump in and commit to Oklahoma, I like things potentially going back to USC. I'm not going to say that USC is definitely going to end up with him, but if Oklahoma can't sort of capitalize on that momentum, it feels like maybe you get back more into a 50-50 toss-up. USC can really get back into recruiting him and jump into this thing and be fine. And at the end of it, we're not talking about what happened in this and how did USC let him go. It's a phenomenal recruiting win for USC. So I still think there's stuff to play out, but I'm not going to downplay that Oklahoma has nothing to offer this kid. I mean, they've got plenty of running back success in their history. They have a strong baseball program that they can pitch with a head coach that he clearly is connected with. So it's one of those things. And at the end of the day, if he ends up going to Oklahoma, it's kind of that video you see where the guy's kind of drying his tears. Woody Harrelson from Zombieland, right? Drying his tears with $100 bills, that kind of thing. Oh, well, USC goes back to their two standout freshmen that they have right now, plus Brian Jackson in that class. Plus, if Kyle McDonald wants to go ahead and go out and take a look at somebody else in this class or in the transfer portal, USC is going to be fine at running back. Yes, you want to add as many players with Taylor Tatum's ability as possible in every class. Sometimes you take a shot at a guy and it doesn't work out, but I'm not going to say that USC did this the wrong way. I like being strong and this is our guy. We're going after him. We're putting everything on the line here and seeing how it plays out.
Yeah, I tell you, I don't think when it's all said and done, if SC doesn't get Taylor Tatum, I don't think SC did anything wrong in recruiting him. I think they did everything right. If they rolled the dice and lost players because they were doing everything right with Tatum, Tatum holds some responsibility too, because it's been reported that he's asked SC to wait on taking, quote, the first guy of the between him and Palmer. Just wait on me. They did that, so they put faith in Tatum. I think that the relationship of DeMarco Murray, who's an excellent recruiter for Oklahoma. I remember when DeMarco Murray was a high school player for Bishop Gorman and watching him at the Rising Stars camp that Pete Carroll was observing. I think that it was interesting, of course, to learn that Tatum first love is apparently baseball, but I'll reserve the fact that I'm sure that Deuce Robinson will call him up and say why he selected USC when it comes to being football or baseball. And I don't underestimate Andy Stankiewicz either. He's a good coach. He's a good baseball coach. Look what he did this year in turning the program around. Now, apparently, as Erik pointed out, Tatum's dad is very close now with Murray. East Texas players tend to look at Oklahoma or LSU. So there's no embarrassment there. I don't think, from all the reports that I've seen, I've read, or heard, that Taylor Tatum's in a hurry to make an announcement. Might come as early as July, may come later. But as we say in all recruits, it's never really over until they sign, either in December or February. So with that, let's move on. Last week, the Trojans got a huge commitment from four-star Clearwater, Florida offensive center Jason Zandermilla. Panel, your assessments regarding Zandermilla. How does he fit in the overall offensive line recruiting room, Marc Kulkin?
Huge win. I mean, at least on the recruiting front, everyone kind of assumed he was going to be, going to Florida State, played high school football in Florida, but he's still really raw. Came over from Africa, Mozambique, and so he's still kind of learning the game. Josh Henson, as I mentioned, I know Oklahoma was looking at him, so we can take Josh Henson got a recruiting win over Bill Biedenbaugh. But when you look at him right now, he's gonna. I don't think anybody would disagree. He's going to be a red shirt when he comes in. USC's got a lot of depth at the offensive line position. They brought in 5 guys in the 2023 class. You got a lot of young guys as it is. So they're building the team from the inside out, which is what you want. But you love his size, 6'3", 285, 290. He played rugby, I guess, growing up as a kid too. So he's going to be physical, and you want that in your offensive lineman. So big, huge recruiting win, 4-star. You go into Florida, and just from that optics point of view, it's Lincoln Riley. He's getting the guys out of Southern California. He's getting guys out of Georgia. He's dipping into Texas. Now he's dipping into Florida. USC is back recruiting nationally. And when you're recruiting and winning those battles against the Florida States, the Oklahomas, the Miamis, you're doing a good job, especially if you're doing it from USC. So nothing negative here, Chris.
Well, okay. Well, you brought in the name Chris. So Chris, anything negative about this?
I don't think it's ever negative when you pull a 4-star lineman out of Florida. That's a good thing. It sounds like the kid's a pretty good athlete. Mark mentioned that he was a rugby player, which means he probably can run a little bit. And certainly his high school coach was talking about what a fantastic athlete he is. So yeah, I mean, this could be a big time center of the future. And yeah, it's always great. Look, there are only so many offensive linemen that are going to come out of California. And so you can recruit your receivers and your quarterbacks and your defensive backs out of California, and you never have to leave maybe 15 miles from USC. But at offensive and defensive line, you got to go across the country. So this was a good pickup.
Erik McKinney.
Yeah, I love guys that coaches designate as future centers. I'm a big fan of those guys because you assume they're eventually going to be able to either play center or guard. It gives you versatility at 3 positions on the interior, and they're going to learn a ton about the offense and that ability to move. I mean, we've seen it with Justin Dedich, kind of everything that he's been able to do. Now all of a sudden USC needs him at center. Here you go. He's played a bunch of guard, all of that kind of stuff. I think when you bring in, Micah Benuelos is coming in with that same idea in this class. And yeah, there's so much talk about the transfer portal, right? How you can add guys. And I think bringing in maybe 1 or 2 big time veteran offensive linemen is always going to be good for any elite program, just to fill. If you have a hole to fill at left tackle, let's go get a guy who can play it right now. But you have to keep adding high school prospects, and even guys that maybe 2-3 years down the road. That's the position, I think, where it's the most important to bring in developmental guys, because offensive linemen, it feels like, and Josh Henson talks about it a little bit, feels like maybe they're the least likely to just hop in the portal. And he talks about kind of the connection you build there and kind of the group feeling and being part of a unit there kind of keeps them together. So if you can bring in those young guys, you figure you've got them for a few years and you can develop them. And anytime you're adding a big time athlete like this with a high ceiling, yeah, that's a spot where you want to bring in those guys. So again, USC has done really a phenomenal job adding the number of offensive linemen. We all sat here and talked years ago. It wasn't that they weren't bringing in good offensive linemen, but they weren't bringing in offensive linemen at all. I mean, classes of 2 offensive linemen and just kind of missing everywhere on big time talented guys and also just depth at all. So that is one of those things where you put a check mark on. They are making sure that they hit that spot and bring in versatile guys that can play tackle, that can play interior. And like I said, the specific, this guy can play center, and that's where, we see him. Those are important spots to fill.
Yeah, I think that Jason Zandermilla is a really big recruit for a number of reasons. Well, first of all, we know he's from Mozambique, right? We know that as a youth, he played rugby. We know that he left his home 4 or 5 years ago. He's been living basically almost like in a boarding school situation at Clearwater Academy, which takes in a lot of international players. So he was really already used to not having to worry about where, leaving his parents, and that stuff's all behind him. The thing about him is he's going to play in the All-America game in San Antonio, which is going to bring great exposure to USC, and a lot of kids will be watching it on NBC. The difference between Lucas Simmons, who also went to Clearwater Academy, was that Lucas Simmons basically didn't want to leave the state of Florida, so Florida State was his option. Where the coach of Clearwater Academy said that this was a whole different kid. He's a great kid. I watched extensive film on him. This kid can move. He can. What he did as a center is what you see in the NFL. This guy can pull out as a center. First of all, make a shotgun snap, pull out, cross block. He can do it all. I'm not so sure that he couldn't be an offensive guard, but strictly as a center, he was able to pull out and trap outside linebackers. He gets to the second level. He can even get to the third. He doesn't stop hustling. He is going to be a man among boys at an early age coming into SC. And while they may redshirt him, you know what? He's a real learner. I was really impressed by him. So with him in the fold, that'll take us to this week where we see a number of USC prospects going to make their commitments. Let's take a look at each of these prospects. Panel, give a comment on each. Predict to me where you think they're going to commit. Well, we already know that one of them, 4-star wide receiver Ryan Pellum, committed to USC on Monday from Long Beach Millikan. Excuse me. He was reportedly down to USC in Oregon. That's always a big win when SC now in this day and age of battling the Ducks. Your thoughts on Pelham and how he fits in the wide receiver room. Mark, how do you see him fitting in that wide receiver room? What does he bring to the table? And you have to be proud because this is from your alma mater, Millikan. Am I correct?
That's right, man. Home of the movie American Pie, for those who didn't know it. Yeah, what Ryan brings to the room, he's a ultra fast, quick twitch guy. I mean, you can line him up outside, you can line him up in the slot, but he is he creates mismatches, whomever has to defend him. I had a chance to watch him a lot, and he makes plays. He's got soft hands, he runs really good routes, and he's willing to go across the middle too. So, you know, you can compare him to a lot of different USC receivers, but I guess most recently, maybe like a much faster version of Amon-Ra St. Brown. He has that type of ability. And he's got a lot of twitch to him. He's gonna make a lot of people miss in the open field. Great pickup for USC.
Chris, how does he fit in this room? Lincoln Riley, I guess, can't have enough receivers, right?
Yeah, not in this offense. Look, Mark bummed me out a few minutes ago talking about Taylor Tatum, but now that he says that Pelham is like a much faster Amon-Ra, that sounds pretty good to me. I don't know if he, that sounds like an all-pro. This is a kid who's explosive, and he's also very smart. You think about it, he was down to USC in Oregon. He chose USC. I mean, that tells you something right there. So this is a kid who's going to pick up the playbook very, very quickly, probably end up doing doctoral work at MIT. USC should land guys like this, right? If USC wants a big-time receiver from Long Beach, they should get them. And part of I think we opened that question talking about the battle between USC and Oregon. The truth is there shouldn't be one when it comes to kids like this. And increasingly, I suspect there won't be. So yeah, good pickup. I'm never worried about wide receivers. I mean, Lincoln Riley's going to find wide receivers, and USC is a pretty attractive place to go if you're a wideout. I mean, they're going to have a great offense, great quarterbacks, all that. But yeah, he looks like an athletic kid. I'm excited to see him. So good pickup.
Erik, your recruiting guru background, what is SC getting in Pelham?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the uniform. He's number one. He's got the blue and gold. I see a little Deshaun Jackson, maybe not as much kind of pure burner speed in there, but you watch what he does and getting the ball in the backfield, able to beat anybody deep. I mean, clearly enough speed to do that. He's got some wiggle. There's some special team stuff in there for him. So I think that's it. Again, you always hesitate, right? It's always the comparison is at his best if everything goes well. he ends up like this. You don't want to say that he's a NFL star at this point, but that's kind of what keeps popping up for me as a comp with him. And yes, it's USC when they are recruiting well, they get the skill guys that they want. And USC was not in the top 10 for Ryan Pellum when he announced his top 10. I mean, we always laugh when guys announce their top 16 and their top 25s and all those big groups. And it's like, oh, I wonder if the school he chooses is going to come from there, because every school is in there. When he announced his top 10, it looked like, okay, that's going to be done. USC did work to kind of get back in there and fix that and explain some things and really finish this recruitment the right way. And now you're sitting there with Xavier Jordan and Ryan Pellum, the top two receivers in California. And really, when you looked at the class before anybody started committing or really recruiting them, those were the two receivers. It was like USC has to get these two guys. And then you can go out nationally and cherry pick some other guys. But no, this is, you start talking about bringing in Zachariah Branch and now Pelham and some of that slot ability that you're going to have over the coming years is really impressive, what they're putting together. Then you add the outside receivers too. And yeah, this wide receiver room is not going to be lacking as long as Lincoln Riley is calling the offensive plays.
Well, you certainly need great wide receivers to run this type of passing offense. I think the thing that impresses me is Marc was right. He's twitchy, but I also thought he was pretty smooth for being twitchy. He would come out of the backfield, take handoffs. He can do it all. Important that he stays in Southern California. Just another small step, but big step in corralling the skill talent in Southern California. The fact that he didn't have SC originally in his top 10, and all of a sudden now they're the ones that go. This shows you how important recruiting momentum is. And I will just say this before we go to the next player we want to talk about. The idea of what SC is number 6 in the country now, according to On3. There are players out there that want some sort of confirmation that SC's got that momentum. I refer to Williamu Asa, who just came back from Ohio State, Peyton Woodard, of course, teammate, committed to Georgia. These players are going to step back and they're going to look at this. They're going to look at their great recruiting official visit they had, and they see the momentum. And it's going to be a lot easier to sit there and say, I'll commit to SC today than it was maybe 5 months ago. So this is just another example of the Trojans hitting the accelerator on recruiting, which means tomorrow, 4-star safety Marquis Gallegos from West Torrance, California, Chaminade, is reportedly down to USC and Oregon, and Notre Dame is in the mix. He's expected to announce today, which would be Tuesday when we've taped the show earlier in the evening. His thoughts, or I should say your thoughts on Gallegos. Where does he commit, Marc Kulkin, and what does he bring to the table?
So USC is going to have another commitment on tomorrow when Marquis announces. I don't think I'm really letting this out of the bag for anybody. It was kind of obvious when somebody canceled the trip to Eugene this past weekend, along with Ryan Pellum. Typically, if players are going to announce for those programs, they don't bypass the official visit. So if anybody wants to connect the dots, there you go. But what you're getting with this guy is a hitter, somebody who likes to put his shoulder into people. And, for anybody who's watched USC defense the last few years, even before Alex Grinch arrived, physicality has been a question mark. That's not a question mark with Marquis Gallegos. So again, another elite Southern California prospect that USC is keeping home that Erik was just talking about. Real important. And that sends the message to the Kingston Williamu Asas. Hey, you know what? It's time to stay home. It reminds Peyton Woodyard, you know what? Spots are filling up. If you're considering USC, don't wait too much longer. And, to your point, Greg, USC is going to be getting another official visit in July from a local prospect from Dylan Williams, who had some pretty interesting comments recently that we can talk about later in the show, I'm sure. But to the point, getting the defensive guys now to stay home is going to have a domino effect with the other guys.
Chris, how do you see this Gallegos? How is he going to help? What do you expect? Where's he going?
I mean, I think everybody in the world knows where he's going at this point. You don't have to follow recruiting very closely. Look, another smart kid. He was down to USC and Oregon and is going to do the right thing. It's always good to see that. I mean, the way I look at it is guys that are down to USC and Oregon and choose Oregon, they probably don't have what it takes to survive at USC academically in most cases. Look, I haven't seen him play. I've looked at his offer sheet, and if you're being offered by Oregon, Notre Dame, Michigan, A&M, Penn State, Tennessee, LSU, Oklahoma, etc., that's probably some indication that you can play some football. I'm just happy to see that USC is starting to build this fence around Southern California again. There was a time when every once in a while somebody would pull a recruit out of Southern California, but also for the most part, whether it was Nick Saban or Urban Meyer or whoever it was, they weren't going to commit a lot of resources to those guys because they just knew that if USC wanted them, USC was going to get them. And I think that Riley's starting to rebuild that. And that's good to see. So good. Another smart kid, another Southern California guy doing the right thing.
Erik, what does this mean if he goes to USC?
Yeah, I mean, it's another added big time defensive player, right? I mean, that's kind of the key for me is you love the Ryan Pellums, right? You love the offensive guys. Those are necessary, but feel like givens, the offensive skill talent. USC's cheating a little bit with kind of the offenses that they put out when they bring those guys in. The fact that USC is really convincing, and in this case, a local, again, we're anticipating later today when this comes out that he does announce for USC, convincing those local prospects who all saw what happened last year. And you talk to some of the local guys about what happened last year, and they're a little sheepish to even get into what happened, it didn't go quite so well, right? So they saw that, they know what happened. And in this one off season, you're seeing more and more of them kind of understand where things are going. A ton of them were at a bunch of the spring ball practices, saw what USC added this offseason, saw what the defense is looking like moving forward. Now, when they announce and they're starting to build this class at the end here in June, and they'll add probably more guys in July, you still have the season. Nobody's locked in yet. You still have to show this on the field during the season. But we're at a point in recruiting now where you can build a ton of summer momentum because of these early official visits. You don't have to wait till those 3 days before signing day anymore to really ramp things up. You can finish your class off now. So again, there's the momentum here and then carrying it over. But he's a guy who very early on, when the USC coaches showed up, he was a clear target for them. And his offer list has been mentioned. His top 5 was Notre Dame's in there, Michigan's in there. I mean, the teams that USC has to beat on the field and in recruiting battles, that was his entire top 5. So it's a big time addition. It's another, a lifelong USC fan where when USC is what USC should be, they get those guys. And so it's big. He's number 161 in the On3 rankings. So this is a big time guy, number 13 safety in the country. And again, what we've kind of been touching on, a top 10 player in California as far as the On3 rankings go here. So you start bringing those guys in, and recruiting kind of gets easier and easier when you have this sort of proof of concept building up. But again, key for me, a local defensive guy, where you add him to like a Marcellus Williams, and that class starts coming together where you have those local guys really buying in to what USC is doing on that side of the field.
Yeah, a very, very important recruit to commit. One of the things was he was kind of injured at times early in his career. So some of his exposure, maybe at camps wasn't as big as some of the others. But I will say this, I watched a lot of film on him. Mark is right. He will lay the wood. But to me, from my perspective, what really impressed me was he wasn't looking for the big hit all the time. We always talk about get him to the ground. This guy made a ton of tackles strictly by going for somebody's legs or ankles and just not allowing him to run any further than when he got a hold of him. So rather than guys bouncing off of him or breaking tackles, he did the safe thing. He said, I'm bringing you down. He went exactly for their legs. And to me, that was really important because we are in an age where everyone wants the ESPN big hits, separate the ball. This guy wants to just get you down. And let's face it, if you can't use your legs, you're not going anywhere. So I was impressed with him. Now we get to some stuff that's really kind of more, maybe should we say, difficult to call. But let's take a look first at four-star wide receiver Dre'lon Miller from Silsbee, Texas. He's reportedly down to USC and LSU. Miller is expected to announce on Thursday. Your thoughts on Miller and where does he commit, Marc Kulkin?
Yeah, let's go 3 for 3 on the week. I feel comfortable with Dre'lon Miller choosing USC. And if we're using his words that he and another guy we're going to be talking about here momentarily, linebacker Anthony Smith, they're friends. And Dre'lon said 100% they're playing in college together. Now, the problem is USC is and LSU are both recruiting Dre'lon. I don't believe LSU is involved with Anthony Smith, at least to the extent. Right. So again, if we're reading the tea leaves, it feels good for USC.
Chris, you're familiar there. You're at Oklahoma, Texas area. You watch some of the stuff that gets down here. What do you think about this East Texas recruit Dre'lon Miller, SC and LSU?
So I'm not going to offer a prediction on Miller because I don't know. Although certainly we had good things to hear after his official. I will say this though, because this is important for USC fans to understand, and that is that Silsbee, Texas, is not Los Angeles, and so when you're talking about pulling kids out of these smaller towns in Texas, it's close to the Louisiana border. It is a different place, and Lincoln Riley has said that USC is not for everybody, and that's true in a lot of ways. It's true in terms of location. It's true in terms of the academic requirements, right? It's not just. I'm not saying that the coaches at LSU or other places wouldn't also force you to go to class, and I'm not talking about Miller here anyway, because I have no idea what kind of student he is. But when you have to go to class at USC, you're also going with students who are really good academically, right? I mean, it's a different kind of place. And so pulling kids out of a place like Silsbee, Texas to come to USC is a big deal. Will they do it here? I don't know. Although if I had to bet, I would bet yes. It's just important to recognize that this is, let's put it this way. We've had this discussion about Tatum and OU or USC. Going from where Taylor Tatum grew up to Norman, Oklahoma is a whole lot easier than going from where he grew up to Los Angeles. And so it really depends what you want out of life and where you're comfortable. And I think I mentioned a week or two ago, my daughter is a server at a restaurant in LA, right? So my daughter calls me one day and she says that at that particular evening, she had served Paul McCartney, Tom Hanks, Woody Harrelson, Adele, and LeBron James. And here's my point on that, is that if you go to Oklahoma and you're a football player, you are by far the biggest star. You are a huge fish in a very small pond. And maybe that's what you want. If you go to USC, even if you're Caleb Williams, you are not close to the biggest star in LA. Not close. He's the biggest star in college football, but he goes to some of the trendiest places in Los Angeles. He may be the fourth most famous person there. It's just a completely different world. So I don't know what Dre'lon Miller wants. It sounds like they were pretty enamored by the visit. And if you're a wide receiver and you have a chance to play in Lincoln Riley's offense, that's probably a pretty tough thing to pass up. Just keep in mind that when you're trying to pull a kid like this, if he decides not to come, you can't really yell and scream about Lincoln Riley dropping the ball and not doing a very good job, because it's tough to pull kids out of a place like that and stick them in the middle of Hollywood. It really is.
Eric, what's going to happen?
Yeah, I think USC gets both of them. But that's just because I can't, I could hedge my bet. They were both at Texas A&M unofficially. Who knows what goes on there, right? I mean, that late unofficial visit now before your announcement, because the school knows, the program knows, the people involved know when your commitment is, when you're scheduled to announce. They know how much they need to ramp things up here at the end. And you can be in the driver's seat for 99.9% of a kid's recruitment. And at the very end, the right things show up or get said, and now you're second. And so you did all that work and then you don't go. So is there something that could happen between USC's official visits with them, which again, went phenomenally, and when they ultimately decide, and oh, by the way, then when they ultimately sign, and then, oh, by the way, when they ultimately show up on campus, and then when they actually suit up and play, there's so many times now where you can end up flipping schools or making a different decision or going a different way. But USC has done everything that they've needed to do in these recruitments to put themselves in the driver's seat heading into decision time. It sure feels like. I think Dre'lon Miller, the comp for him that On3 has used is Deebo Samuel. And that's one of those things where you start, again, we've talked about what Lincoln Riley can do with versatile players. We've seen Raleek Brown play running back, go out to the slot. We've seen guys, Zachariah Branch is a guy that can line up just anywhere. Dre'lon Miller is a big, thick wide receiver that can do a lot of different things, and is the Texas 7-on-7s were just this past weekend, and he was the guy at one of those things. And USC, when they are rolling, they recruit the guy at those events. And so that he fits in with a player that can come to USC and make a big time impact. And Anthony Smith is one of those guys where Brian Odom he seems to have a recruiting style where he goes through that class and he finds 2 or 3 guys. It does not feel like he's recruiting 20 guys and trying to juggle a bunch of things. And we got to end up with a certain number. He goes after a small set of guys. Anthony Smith jumped on the radar very early. USC went after him in a big way. And again, yes, he's a 4-star guy, but he's not a top 100 guy. He's not a top 200 guy. USC clearly likes what he brings and how he fits. And again, has seemingly put themselves in a pretty good position for him. USC is recruiting Texas phenomenally at seemingly every position. That staff making themselves at home there. And I can't imagine the coaching staffs that typically pull these kind of guys out of Texas are all too happy about that. But it doesn't seem like USC staff makes anybody too happy at this point. Everybody's kind of getting used to ganging up on the Trojans at this point, which is how USC must like it too. So again, the guess right now, sure, USC for both those guys. And if that's the way it ends up happening, 2 more unbelievable pickups for this class that is looking like it is climbing towards that top 2, top 3, what we've seen from Alabama, Georgia in terms of putting talent together in a recruiting class.
Yeah, let me just underscore the Dre'lon Miller. I think I watched him be interviewed and with Texas football. Dave Campbell's Texas Football Magazine did an interview with him recently. And they asked him about USC, and he says, what's not to like about USC? It's LA. As soon as I heard that, it's LA. This is a guy that may come from, as Chris said, a very small East Texas town of Silsbee, who definitely wants to see the big time. He's had enough of Silsbee, but he's ready to make that challenge. The LA challenge is the way I took it. Is he a speed burner? No, but boy, can he go up and high point a ball. And that'll fit perfectly for what Lincoln Riley wants. Let's move on here to safety. 4-star safety Braylon Conley from Humble, Texas, is reportedly down to USC, Texas, TCU, and Arkansas. He's expected to announce on Friday. What are your thoughts on Conley? Where does he commit? Is SC really rolling the dice on how many safeties are they going to take? We assume that Gallegos is going to come to SC, announcing it later today on Tuesday. Mark, where are we in this?
You know, this is the one of the 5 that I guess my confidence level is not leaning towards USC. It's just right in the middle. I've heard good things. If he commits, I don't know. Look, I don't know. I don't even want to say he would be holding a spot, because look, there's still, we know USC's still out there recruiting Peyton Woodyard really hard. There's the defensive back from San Mateo JC, Sione Lole. There's a lot going on out there. So if they get his commitment, you got to give a big old hat tip to Dante Williams, first of all, because he's just hauling everybody. And you just see how it plays out. I don't know if he will be a Trojan on the 30th. Is that on Friday? I'm hoping. I know there's been some crystal balls looking at USC. I just don't know.
All right, Dallas Arledge here. What do you think is going to happen here with Braylon Conley? Humble, Texas. Tell people where Humble, Texas is for those that aren't familiar with the landscape of Texas.
I don't even know. Should I pick up my phone and do the map thing real quick? I have no idea where it is. I've never been to Humble, Texas. But look, this is one of those kids that's interesting, because you're coming all the way to Humble, Texas to get a guy who most of the services ranks as a 3-star prospect, right? But then you look at his offer list, and you've got, you have Texas and Oregon and Auburn and Georgia and schools like and Michigan on it. So I don't know. It sounds like the coaches are seeing something that maybe some of the recruiting services are not. I'm going to go ahead and say yes, because if I had to choose between USC, Texas, TCU, and Arkansas, that seems like a pretty easy choice. Am I going to go play Versark? That doesn't make any sense. Do I want to go play at TCU, which is a perfectly acceptable place, but that's a one-year wonder program? No, Arkansas hasn't been good since They haven't been good since Holtz was there in the 70s. So I think it's a no-brainer that he chooses USC, and so I'm going to go ahead and put in my prediction today.
Okay, Eric, what is it about Braylon Conley that they like? What is it about Braylon Conley that should come to SC? What does he bring?
I mean, honestly, I don't know a ton about him. So it's not something that I'm going to dive into in terms of scouting him or anything like that. He was a name early on that you threw into that kind of defensive back recruiting thing. I think Jarvis Boatwright is kind of the same thing, right? He committed to USC sort of out of nowhere. You had this idea of a bunch of local corners and safeties that were going to be priorities. And yeah, USC still might end up with a lot of those guys, but then these other guys have popped up too. And I'm going to say Conley right now, yeah, more likely than not, it's USC. I do think he, could potentially be one of those guys where things kind of shake out and you see what happens. But these USC coaches are very clear about, these are our guys, we're going after them. Everybody get on board. Lincoln Riley has talked about, get on the rocket ship or watch it go by. They've clearly told that to a lot of recruits, and they are ready to get on right now. And the USC coaches so far haven't struck me as a group that will hold spots and then shake them loose and then go. They know, if we're bringing in this guy, this is the guy that we're going with, because they've told some, from our perspective, like big time guys, hey, we're going with the guys that are coming with us right now. So again, it'll be It'll be one to watch, but I know the committed recruits for USC think this is going to be a huge week for USC. And so anyone that we're talking about right now who's announcing, I'm going to say, yeah, more likely than not, it means USC.
Yeah, and I think it means USC as well. My biggest thing is, to me, I am super focused on Peyton Woodyard. I so badly want to see this guy decommit from Georgia and come to SC, not because it's Georgia, but because it's USC, our backyard, St. John Bosco. I know the impact that Marcellus Williams is having with both Asa and with Woodyard. If they could pull in Woodyard, we may see some sort of rearrangement of the safeties. I don't know. I think Erik was trying to politely say, would somebody who maybe is committed be they're overextending? But it all starts to me with what happens with Woodyard, and that will be fascinating. I hope sooner rather than later that Woodyard would say, I'm coming to SC. Okay, our last one that we want to deal with, and I think we touched on him a little bit, was four-star linebacker Anthony Smith from Jasper, Texas. He's reportedly down to USC, Texas, Texas A&M, and Baylor. He's expected to announce soon after the re-announcement by Dre'lon Miller, since both say they want to attend the same university. If you look at where they visited and where they've gone, the only thing that Anthony Smith and Dre'lon Miller have in common in terms of visit is USC. So you can do your own deduction there. What are your thoughts on Smith? Where does he commit, Mark?
Oh, I've already said he's coming to SC, but the fact that USC is going to have the recruiting momentum on the defensive side of the ball going into everybody's fall camps, it's a huge momentum builder. It's going to say, all right, and I talked about it early in the show, you'll see the Kingston Viliamu Asas willing to jump on board. You'll see, I mentioned Dylan Williams earlier. It's crazy when I read those comments that the previous staff had no interest in him. They looked at his film and he just kind of felt disrespected. And now, he's asking to come and take a visit. He made it sound like he wants to be a part of the program. So suddenly, where USC was struggling to recruit linebackers, you're now starting to put together a pretty nice linebacker class, assuming you get all three of those guys. So I think that Anthony Smith is just the first to pull the trigger. And you're going to, as Erik said, the recruits are talking out loud. They're making their voices heard. It's going to be a really big week for USC. We might not even know. Somebody else might be ready to announce it we're not even aware of.
True. Chris, do you know where Jasper, Texas is?
Yeah, I just looked it up because I thought you were going to ask me. It's about 2.5 hours east of College Station, which is where Texas A&M is. And I know that there are USC fans that are nervous because anytime you hear about kids, especially Texas kids, visiting Texas A&M right before they're supposed to commit to USC, you get nervous that they might find large bags of cash in the backseat of the car. And they might. Who knows? Although, look, here's the thing. Erik had mentioned earlier that, Oklahoma has a lot to offer a kid like Taylor Tatum. And this is true. I like to make fun of the OU fans. They don't have anything to offer, but the university and the football program do. But Texas A&M, come on, guys. Texas A&M is the biggest grease fire in college football right now. Everybody knows that. They got the highest ranked recruiting class of all time and probably lost all those guys, and the program is spiraling out of control. And the only reason that Jimbo Fisher still has a job there is because even the Texas oil man can't afford to fire him under his current salary. Everybody knows that. I'm quite sure that Anthony Smith knows that too. Now, if they offer him a large bag of cash, and I'm not saying they have, don't sue me for defamation. I'm just saying if that happens, theoretically, then he should take it and then transfer to USC next year. But unless they're giving him a huge bag of cash, it seems like an absolute no-brainer. Why in the world? Well, seriously, why in the world would you want to go play that program? While I'm on a roll, historically, Texas A&M is the most underachieving program in college football, right? They have unbelievable resources, unbelievable recruiting territory. And even when they're good, they lose 4 and 5 games a year. I mean, it's silly. Ty Anthony Smith is going to commit to USC because it would be absolutely ridiculous for him not to.
Erik, ridiculous? Where's Anthony going? I think you mentioned how you felt about it. Anything you want to add?
No, I think he ultimately commits to USC, and USC keeps building that linebacker room.
Yeah, and I'll just complete this first half here. I don't get why someone wants to go to Texas A&M under the current situation. Jimbo Fisher is waiting to be fired as soon as they can feel good conscience to get rid of him. It's a disaster. I don't know how you, I mean, if you grow up in Texas, I'm sure you're used to it, but the heat and humidity of College Station is ridiculous. I was actually somewhat surprised when Jordan Lockhart said that he was going to go and he announced for Texas A&M. I felt like saying, Jordan, do you understand what is going on there? I'm sure they gave you the time of your life, but a Southern California kid from St. John Bosco making that decision under those circumstances was somewhat surprising to me. But let's hit the halftime. Some quick hitters on Big Ten programs. We're kind of giving some just quick thoughts on Big Ten programs since SC is going into the Big Ten following this season. And we'll also do these quick hitters on Pac-12 as kind of an exit interview thing after we finish up with the Big Ten. But all right, panel, here we go. When you think of Iowa football, you think of what, Erik?
Safeties right now. It seems like they put a bunch of big time safeties out in the NFL and solely defense, right? One of the worst offenses in all of college football lately. That's kind of traditionally when they show up again against USC, I'm going to think about that Holiday Bowl because that one was rough to watch and one of what we thought was kind of the final appearance of the guy that Chris will want to talk about, I'm sure, at some point.
All right, Marc Kulkin, when you think of Iowa football, you think of?
I think I'm watching the Pittsburgh Steelers because of the uniforms, but I love Iowa. Like Erik said, you think defense. That's who they are. That's what they are. They've had the same defensive coordinator since Moses was leading his people across the desert. I mean, that's the thing about Iowa football. It's consistent. And what I look forward to when we go out there, when USC takes a trip, is the whole waving to the Children's Hospital. To me, that is one of the new great traditions that's been created. I'll probably get a little teary-eyed when that happens. I look forward to it.
No, that's a good point. They make a point of that on a telecast that they look up at that Children's Hospital. So when you think of Iowa football, Chris Arledge, you think of?
Ugly. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. I actually think football should be a little bit ugly. And Iowa is. I mean, Erik pointed out their difficulty scoring points. I mean, they would be the lowest scoring team in Major League Soccer, I think. I mean, they can't do anything offensively. But they're tough and they're physical and they're disciplined. And look, there are no players in Iowa. I don't mean that Iowa high schools don't have football. I suspect many do. But there are no players in Iowa. And so to have the history Iowa has in light of that fact, I think is pretty impressive. So yeah, tough, physical, ugly, a little bit boring, and but a threat to knock you off at their place. Iowa's not a team that's going to come to the Coliseum and beat Lincoln Riley very often, if ever. But you better strap on your big boy pants if you're going to play an away game at that place with that crowd and that style of play. I mean, you've seen what they've done to the heavyweights of the Big Ten conference in the last 10 years. It's not at all unusual for them to knock off somebody. So, yeah, ugly, but I respect them.
All right, when I think of Iowa football, I think of the fan support. A lot of fans, a lot of Iowa transplants in the Long Beach area. I'm impressed how they fill Kinnick Stadium where they play. They play ugly. They're tough. They're physical. On a given day in Iowa, they can knock you off. I suspect when Iowa comes to play in the Coliseum, it will be sold out. They really, really back their team, and they deserve a lot of credit. All right. Panel, when you think of Nebraska football, Erik McKinney, you think of?
For me, that's the fans, the home sellout streak, the fact that they travel, they can take over stadiums. That's it for me.
Mark?
Yeah, I mean, you think what Erik just said, first thing off the bat, but then Big Red, you think black shirts, Tom Osborne, Tommy Frazier, the wishbone offense. I remember Nebraska playing Oklahoma. That was the rivalry to watch. If you were into that type of, 3 yards in a cloud of dust, and then boom, all of a sudden you got a 70-yard run for a touchdown. Nebraska in the Big Ten it's been a transition, I guess. It's the best way to put it for them.
That's you're going to say disaster.
Well, it's been a transition. It hasn't gone the way they've wanted it. But, I remember the trip that USC took out to Lincoln, Nebraska, and it salt of the earth. Again, I don't think I paid for anything during tailgating. It's a different situation with tailgating too. It's more of a bar eatery type of scene. And we walked in, and I don't know, just some guy at the end of the bar, packed, says, "You guys are USC fans? It's on the house." It's like, all right, we're staying here all day long. So, yeah, fun place to visit.
All right, Chris, you think of Nebraska football. What do you think of?
I get sad. I mean, the thing about Nebraska is this is one of the all-time great programs, right? Going back a long way. And the guys touched a little bit on this history, but Nebraska, until probably 10 or 15 years ago, if you had to rank your top 5 or 6 programs of all time, Nebraska's in that. They may have slipped a notch or two since then. And I think it's clear now that those days are never coming back. You think about how difficult it is to have an elite college football program in Nebraska. I mean, it's not even like Notre Dame, which Notre Dame is out in the middle of nowhere, but Indiana has access to players within 3, 4, 5 hours in a way that Nebraska does not. Nebraska has farm boys, and maybe you can throw some on the offensive line. They do not have football players there. They just don't. And I don't think there's any way you can get that back if you're Nebraska. And that's sad, because this is a program that has better fan support than maybe any program in history. When they came to the Coliseum, I was talking to a Nebraska fan, and I was commenting on how amazing their turnout was, and he said, "Yeah, it's kind of the only thing that separates us from South Dakota is Nebraska football and the whole state." And I played in Missouri, and we played a couple of teams in Nebraska. And I remember going there on a Nebraska game day. All the fans were going to see the Cornhuskers, not the team we were playing. But you look around the town, and everybody you see is head to toe in red Cornhuskers gear. I mean, that's a state that loves their program. They love their history. So it kind of makes me sad. If Alabama had a fall like Nebraska, I wouldn't be sad about it. I would get a certain amount of joy. Like for decades, I would get joy. 30 years from now, if you ask me, what do you think about Alabama football? I would just smile thinking about how much it makes me happy that they're terrible. But I don't feel that way about Nebraska. I actually want Nebraska to be good. And I also realize that they never will be again.
Yeah, when I think of Nebraska, it was my trip when SC under Pete Carroll went to Nebraska, and I remember driving out there going, "Where is it? Where is it?" And when I actually arrived there, I said, "This is it. This is the Nebraska I grew up with. Johnny Rogers, Jeff Taggy, those type of players." I taught with a lady who grew up in Nebraska. All she talked about was linebacker Jerry Murtaugh. I mean, they lived for that early 70s Nebraska team. Then, of course, Tommy Frazier. And it's really a tragedy. I agree with Chris. It's a tragedy what's happened in Nebraska football. I don't know whether it's just one thing. Once they got rid of Frank Solich as the coach, thought they were going to go a new way. Whatever they did internally, they may have made a big mistake in hindsight. But you want Nebraska to be good. The fans are great. They're really polite at Memorial Stadium. There's no reason to dislike Nebraska. Hopefully they can get it back under a new coach. Let's wrap this halftime up with what do you think of Michigan State football when you think of the Spartans, Erik?
Izzo. I mean, what? I don't know. What am I supposed to do with Michigan State football? There's years, right? There's years where they pop up, but are they Arizona State? I mean, if we're trying to compare, like taking Pac-12 teams to the Big Ten, that's it.
It's not very nice.
Well, okay, you're gonna get your turn in a second, Chris.
Yeah, just
Mark, what do you think of Michigan State football? What do you think of?
I think of them beating Larry Smith's teams in the Rose Bowl. They're the one team in the Big Ten that USC doesn't have a winning record against. So there's that. Erik touched on it. When you think of Michigan State, you think of basketball first, even though Michigan State has a pretty rich history with their football program. I know it gets cold in East Lansing. I know they despise Notre Dame as much as USC despises Notre Dame. So maybe there's that kinship of Trojans and Spartans there. But yeah, you think of basketball, you think of Magic Johnson.
Wow. Chris, what do you think of when you think of Michigan State football?
So I think Michigan State is my favorite Big Ten football team. And so let's deal first with Mark's point about the not having a winning record. I suspect we'll fix that in short order. As far as Erik's point, is it Arizona State? No, it's the UCLA of the Big Ten. Think about it. You're in the right. You're a rival, and you're in the same location as a true blue blood of college football. You're sort of a thorn in their side, but not really a peer. You have enough tradition and you've had enough success that you can be dangerous, but for the most part, you just kind of underachieve all the time. I mean, Michigan State is UCLA with more manly uniforms is what they are. But here's why, and despite that, they're still my favorite team in the Big Ten. And here's why. Because Michigan State is a team that I can constantly root for against Notre Dame and Michigan and Ohio State and Penn State. And they're good enough that occasionally they will win those games, right? I can root for Indiana against those teams too, but that's almost always a foolish exercise. Indiana's not going to beat those teams. Illinois, Purdue, they're not going to beat those teams. But Michigan State sometimes beats those teams. So I'm a huge, huge fan of the Spartans. I also like it that they're the Spartans. I mean, the Spartans, the Trojans, it's, we're on the same wavelength in terms of ancient warriors. Theirs beat ours, sadly. But I think, look, I'm a fan of Michigan State. I think that we should give them more respect, and I think Erik should probably apologize.
Well, I will say this, when I think of Michigan State football, because I think there's people who say, you watch, he's going to go way back in time. And you are so right. I think of Michigan State under Duffy Doherty. I think of the 1966 Notre Dame Michigan State game. If you ever get a chance to watch it on ESPN Classic or YouTube, you've got to watch it. There was so much talent on both teams, and it was a big game. They talk about the game of the century. This really was like a game of the century. It was so big. The sad part ending of that was it ended up in a tie, and nobody was happy. But boy, I tell you, talk about how one team in one particular year can last, generations. That was it. Michigan State football to me always represented tough football. And I don't know whether Chris could be very right. They could be the UCLA or, as Erik, I think, pointed out, ASU. But they're always lurking.
What I like about, and you don't have to go back to the dawn of time to appreciate Michigan State being Notre Dame. It wasn't that long ago that Michigan State decided to fake a field goal and beat Notre Dame rather than, finish with a tie or send it to overtime. So, yeah, you don't
Sure did. That was beautiful. And by the way, Greg's right. If you want to go watch an almost 60-year-old game that ended in a 10-10 tie, you should go knock yourself out. I'm not sure I'm going to be doing that, but hey.
Suddenly there was a pause.
I mean,
All right.
the
All right.
10-10 tie, Greg. Come on.
I know. But, look, you're a defensive guy. You should love that type of football. All right. Let's go to the second half here. Panel, the Dodgers announced last week that they were promoting a Caleb Williams bobblehead night on Thursday night, April 10th against the Colorado Rockies. It's a great honor for Caleb, no doubt, but shouldn't the Trojans be holding their own Caleb Williams bobblehead night at one of the Trojans 7 home games? I mean, I'm a Dodgers season ticket holder, so I'm happy. I saw a picture of the bobblehead. I said, I don't think that looks like Caleb Williams, but maybe that's just a bad bobblehead. I don't know, but I've been harping about these bobbleheads for home games. Marcus Allen, I know they had one time, but don't you think that the Trojans should be handling a Caleb Williams bobblehead game rather than the Dodgers? Chris, how do you feel about that?
I don't know. I mean, I don't collect bobbleheads. I don't think I know anybody who does collect bobbleheads, but look, if Caleb Williams gets some money off of somebody passing out bobbleheads, then I'm in favor of it. I'm in favor of Caleb Williams getting money from anybody for just about any reason, because he makes my life better. And so I want his life to be better. I don't know. It wouldn't be a terrible idea to have a series of bobbleheads, but if USC did it, I know what they would do. They would just have Heisman Trophy winners, and they wouldn't know what to do with OJ, and that's always very awkward, right? You can't have an OJ bobblehead, can you? So I don't think they'll do it, and also it bothers me a little bit that that USC only retires Heisman Trophy winning numbers. I mean, why is Ronnie Lott's number not retired? I mean, seriously, what's going on with this? Because he didn't win the Heisman? That's ridiculous. First of all, you shouldn't retire anybody's number. But if you're going to retire numbers, you should retire his. And if you're going to have bobbleheads, you should have a Ronnie Lott bobblehead. So I think my conclusion is no, they should have a Ronnie Lott bobblehead.
All right, Eric, I know you're a big baseball fan. I don't know if you collect bobbleheads, but do you find it rather odd that the Dodgers are doing a Caleb Williams bobblehead as opposed to the Trojans having a bobblehead night for Caleb Williams?
I find it super impressive for Caleb Williams that he has crossed that divide. I mean, this is not, you do not do this for current college football players. That this is to me, a huge statement that Caleb Williams is no longer a college football star and now sporting world, just general sporting world star. And that's a big thing for him in this era of NIL and all of that stuff. That's big for Caleb Williams. That's big for USC. And so, yeah, USC should be doing that stuff. I would imagine, I say this never having put it together or having had to do it. I would imagine you've got the posters and all the potential giveaway stuff. Slap some company's logo on there and 10 USC players on a poster, and they get, part of whatever money is coming in. And yeah, the giveaway thing before a game, and potentially that comes into play with, is USC doing that or facilitating that? How can you go through this? Does that have to come through a third party? All those questions that still exist with NIL and the separation that has to be there from the school itself. And so maybe that's why USC can't officially give away a Caleb Williams branded bobblehead. But if you're saying it doesn't look like him, then maybe you can just do that and call it quarterback USC. But yeah, I think that this is the time now where USC fans could really, USC players could benefit from all of that type of tie-ins and giveaways and that sort of thing.
Mark, I know you're a baseball fan. Are you kind of disappointed that the Dodgers are doing the Caleb Williams bobblehead night and not USC?
No, their season is in play right now. So strike while the iron's hot. Why wouldn't you? It doesn't mean USC can't do it. You know, I think Chris said, you know, let's just have a series of them. I'm not opposed to UCLA having a Caleb Williams bobblehead day. Why not?
Someone cut off his mic.
I mean, Chris will be there. He's #1 fan of UCLA, right?
the Michigan UCLA. The Michigan.
Have you ever heard of a college football player being flown to Monaco to start? I mean, if that's going to happen, why not have opposing teams appreciating Caleb Williams? Look, Chris, of course not. I'm just pointing out that it's Caleb Williams' world right now, so he can do whatever he wants.
Was he wearing a Dodger uniform in that bobblehead?
No, he's wearing. I put it on the shameless plug here. I put a picture of it on the IMHO Sunday, this last Sunday's column that was provided.
What's he wearing? He's wearing a suit.
Oh, he's wearing an SC uniform with number 15 on it.
He's wearing his Hugo Boss fashion show outfit.
There you go.
I mean, you start putting together what he's done. I mean, throwing out a first pitch at the Nationals game again. Current college player throwing out the first pitch at a Major League Baseball game on the opposite side of the country where he's playing. I know that's where he's from, but you start listing what he has done this offseason and how he's positioned himself. And is he doing this if he played last year at Oklahoma? Maybe. I mean, he is that good, but you're seeing how playing at USC and being that guy at USC, what it can do for you in terms of these kind of opportunities.
Absolutely. I think that, I also ran a picture in IMHO Sunday of Caleb at the Grand Prix in Monaco. Why don't we just give out a bobblehead of him sitting in a Grand Prix race car? I mean, what this guy has done for SC to recruit and say, this is what could happen to you, and you could experience all these things by coming to LA is really mind-boggling to think of. This was this guy's probably dream master plan. If I come to LA, play for Lincoln Riley, I'll be larger than life. He's everywhere. We're welcome to his world. We all just live in it. It is amazing. Hats off to him, but it is absolutely overwhelming. Let's not forget that in the fall, he's going to be on the Nissan House, Alumni Heisman House commercials throughout the season. And boy, is that a recruiting infomercial right there for a guy, just kind of like what Bryce Young did last season with Alabama, having won the Heisman Trophy winner. It's unbelievable.
This is a worthwhile point, because I had made the statement a couple of months ago on the show that Caleb Williams was going to be college football's biggest star since Tim Tebow, who sort of passed over from college football to just the culture more generally. You haven't seen this from other guys. I mean, being the star quarterback at Alabama, where you win a national championship and win a Heisman Trophy, still doesn't get you nearly this sort of these sorts of opportunities. It just doesn't. And I suspect USC's smart enough to capitalize on that. There are some young quarterbacks out there. I don't know, maybe the kid in Georgia right now, sort of looking at this saying, yeah, I kind of like that. And so I think USC is going to be able to capitalize on all this stuff very nicely.
I mean, Stetson Bennett won 2 national championships. And I don't cover Georgia on a daily basis, but the thing that came across my radar was I believe he worked the drive-through at a Chick-fil-A and kind of surprised people that were going through there. I mean, again, you're going to take the opportunities where they come, but, and not to kind of drag this out even farther, but it takes a special person and player to be able to do what Caleb Williams is doing. Not everybody could both take advantage of the opportunities that are here and also do it in a way where not one time since he's arrived at USC have we heard anything from anyone within the USC program or around it say anything other than he's an unbelievable leader. He works as hard as anybody, and he is involved in every step of everything. You talk about where he's been this offseason, and there's no hint of, he hasn't been with the team or he hasn't been, fulfilling he's the quarterback at USC kind of obligations. And so when you're talking about the opportunities that are there for 2024, 25, 26, all those quarterbacks down the line, you got to find the right guy who can do all those things and find that balance. Caleb Williams has been unbelievable for me in terms of being able to do that and still be the unquestioned leader in the locker room and for USC, with nobody really jealous, seemingly. Again, I don't hear everything from everybody, but nobody outwardly kind of jealous of what he's doing or feeling like he's not kind of pulling his weight when it comes to the team.
And that, we haven't even talked about his charitable stuff. I mean, his Caleb Cares Foundation. Time management has got to be his strongest thing going for him. It's amazing.
And he talks about his team, right? There's plenty of people involved, and we're going to do this, but he goes along with everything and has time for everybody when he shows up to those events, for sure.
All right, panel, what's the biggest high school football recruiting change since you were in high school, Chris? You played high school, you went to college.
Nobody recruited me.
What's the
though.
biggest change since you were in high school as far as recruiting?
Well, there are two, and they're pretty obvious. Number one is the media coverage, right? These kids become household names at a very early age. And second, you're allowed to give people large bags of cash now, which you couldn't then.
Erik?
Yeah, I mean, those two things. I maybe the expectation to play early. I mean, I know that's not kind of recruiting, but again, just to be able to add something to Chris, because Chris is right in those two things: the media coverage, the fact that these guys are. I mean, it always makes me laugh, the programs that lock down the true freshmen from doing media interviews and all that. They've done more. The big time guys have done as many media interviews before they get to campus as they will maybe their whole time on campus. So that they come in pretty polished and ready to go.
Amen to that, brother. Mark?
There's not a whole lot more to add to that. The transfer portal has added a whole nother dimension to it as well. I mean, you can be committed and sign on the dotted line and still transfer and play that same year. So just a lot of different things going on right now with high school recruiting at a really quick pace.
Yeah, I would say from when I was in high school to where we are today, the amount of information, not only coming from publications and valuations and cable and the internet, it's the players themselves that are promoting their own recruiting by, I'm cutting my list down to 10. It's just so much is out there in the open, where at one point it was so hush hush, even to the point where coaches would take players from their house on the recruiting day and hide them out so other schools couldn't get their coaches parking in front of players' houses to try to get the letter signed. It's just all so changed. Panel, we'll finish second half here. In following high school football recruiting, do you have a particular recruiting story or episode, serious or funny, that stands out to you, Chris? Any episode of recruiting for USC or in general that kind of stands out to you?
Two, that 30 for 30 documentary on the Pony Express was kind of interesting. Back when the Texas schools were giving out money and they weren't supposed to. That was it. That was interesting. I'm not going to tell you what happens. Go watch it. The other thing is that what Kennedy Polamalu told me the other day on my show about the recruitment of Reggie Bush, I think, was something I had not heard before. I'm also not going to tell you about that. If you want to know, go watch it. Musings from Arledge, Kennedy Polamalu and Isaiah Polamau gave a great interview. If you're interested in learning all about Reggie Bush and his recruitment, you should go watch it. If you're not interested, then I'm not going to tell you because it'll bore you anyway.
Erik?
Yeah, the kind of the parental flip outs, I guess, always sort of stand out. You had so much time to kind of plan this and come up with something and be on the same page. I think the one, Alex Collins was the one that sort of jumps out, where the mom grabbed the paperwork and drove off. And I can't imagine being a college coach thinking, all right, here we go. We're locked in, big celebration. And then the the mom did what, and trying to kind of figure out where it goes. But there's a lot. There was one, was it Landon Collins? A lot of Collins. Landon Collins' mom, maybe, on when he committed at the
Alabama,
Under
LSU,
Armour
maybe?
game.
Alabama, LSU.
Yeah. So those always jump out. I remember for USC fans, especially the Jimmy Clausen commitment at the College Football Hall of Fame with the stretch Hummer and the ring, all of that kind of stuff. And I remember the family's very involved still in high school football and all of that. And the thought, kind of in hindsight, yeah, maybe that wasn't the best way to do that. But at the time, I'm sure it seemed cool, which again, a lot of the way these kids go through the recruitment, you'd assume in 15, 20 years when they look back at it, it's kind of like, oh, that was an interesting way to handle that.
When I'm having a bad day and I'm really sad, I just think about that Jimmy Clausen commitment and it makes me happy again. I love that. I love it so much. I'll never stop loving it.
You should get a Jimmy Clausen bobblehead sitting in a stretch Hummer.
Do you think the Dodgers will offer that? You should talk to them.
It's possible. Now, Mark, I know you have to have a serious or funny recruiting story that comes to mind. What is it?
I don't know. I remember a few years ago, everyone thought that there's no way that USC was not going to get DeAnthony Thomas to be a USC Trojan. I mean, he played for Snoop Dogg, he was at Crenshaw, and then lo and behold, somebody spots him at LAX. Dude is decked out from head to toe in green and yellow. And it just set the recruiting world on fire. No way is USC losing their next Reggie Bush type of player. Well, we know what happened. And it just started with a fan spotting him at the airport. And that fan was just picking up her daughter from the airport. We've heard about USC, being in home, doing a recruiting visit, and then sneaking a player out the back door when the opposing coach arrives, making sure that they don't get the opportunity. A lot of stuff going on out there. But yeah, Erik touched on a few that it's the stuff that it's the parents' reaction. It's seeing the players react when they throw up the hat or pull out the jersey out of the bag that, well, where did that number 1 jersey come from with your name on it when that's got the school logo? How'd you get that? It's those types of things. And we know what goes on in, the SEC. So lots of stories to talk about, but it's just rehashing old memories.
Well, I have to say that the announcement by Ryan Pellum on Monday was a showstopper. His way of announcing was, I believe it was his child. They handed the baby over to him so that you saw the back of the baby, and he hugged the baby, and then he turns the baby around, and I think it did say "Fight on" the chest, which was a unique way. That was the first that I've ever seen that happen. It was very original. Kudos to Ryan Pelham. But two quick stand out to me. One, when I was at Edison High School, and Edison had a great team. We won the CIF, and we had a star running back named Kerwin Bell, who in the same breath at the time coming out of high school was like with Herschel Walker. And so I remember that there was a big recruiting war for Kerwin, SC, Oklahoma, Texas. I mean, it was just what you would expect of two guys, at least the Western version of Herschel Walker. And I forget that Kerwin took the recruiting trip to Texas. And so I see him the following Monday, and he's walking through campus. And I look at him, and I look down at his feet, and he's wearing these. And now I'm not a cowboy boot aficionado. Let's put that on the table. But I do recognize when I see a pair of snake boots on him. And I said, "Where did you get that from?" And he just smiled at me. He said, "You know." which of course man, I got it from Texas, which was quite amazing. The other one was Artie Gicantino. I've mentioned this before, who was a great recruiting coordinator for USC under John Robinson, and he was relentless in getting out of state recruits, and he went after every single, it seemed like, parade All-America out of state guy, and he lost, I think, almost all of them. And so he cut out pictures of all the people that he missed out on from Parade Magazine, and he put them up in his coach's locker room down in the bottom level of Heritage Hall. And I said, Artie, what did you do that for? And he said, to remind me to stay humble and know it's all about Southern California first. So he got a little bit put in his place by rejection of all these players. I mean, I think one of them was Bruce Clark, linebacker, with great linebacker at the time. All right, let's finish up today's huddle with some questions from listeners. We'll make this brief. Question one from Dr. Who in Central Virginia. Any info on the timeline for fall practice? Also, have you guys heard anything about the schedule for the Pac-12 Media Days? This should be entertaining for Trojan fans. All right, what do we know about, first of all, let's go Media Days. When is it?
Friday, July 21st.
Okay, I knew that somebody here would know that. Okay, do we know when fall practice is supposed to start?
27th, I believe. Is that accurate, Eric? Is that the date you heard, Greg?
That's the date I have rattling around in my brain. There hasn't been any kind of posted official, here we're kicking off fall camp. There's always a chance to kind of
just know this: USC
things around.
has to fit 30 days in between start of fall camp and their first game, which is the 26th of August. So
it'll be earlier than anybody kind of remembers fall camp starting because of that 0-week game.
it's going to be warm.
Okay, question two from S. Chili Dog. Any update on how the search for a new AD is going, or just any type of timeline for a resolution? Thanks. What do we know, or do we know anything?
No, I don't really have any sort of recent update on search for that. We had names sort of published early. I would imagine that USC is going to do as much due diligence as possible on this. So whatever timeline kind of the thought was earlier, I don't think it would be surprising if it dragged out a little bit longer. The same thing will not happen on this hire as much as they can prevent it in terms of not knowing the full scope of what was going on at the previous place when they bring in an AD.
The search committee gives me daily updates, but I'm sworn to secrecy.
The fact that nobody knows anything, I think, is a great sign, because the last time we went through this, we ended up with Lincoln Riley. So we might end up with a really, really good athletic director.
There's a positive note.
Silence is golden.
Silence is golden. Question three from Trojans from the Valley. USC's D was repeatedly hammered by tight ends across the middle and seams last year. Example, Utah, UCLA, Notre Dame. Does SC now have the players and schemes to defend against this glaring weakness from last season? Thoughts?
Well, in fairness, they were also repeatedly hammered by running plays and by passes to wide receivers and by quarterback sneaks. So I don't, is USC going to do a better job of defending the tight end this year? I sure hope so. But I mean, there's so many areas that defense needs to improve. And other than the fact that we think USC has better players now, none of us has any idea what's going to happen, right? We don't know. They don't tell us what schemes they're cooking up to defend against next year's Dalton Kincaid, for example. So we just don't know. But they're going to have better players, and better players usually means better results.
I think there's look, I'm not going to defend what they did defensively there. There was some stuff where coaches and players, I think, would tell you that that's kind of garbage. But when you talk about the Utah tight end, you talk about the Notre Dame tight end, those aren't just guys. I mean, those are top 35 picks. I think both of them went in this NFL draft. Those were big time guys that did a lot of that to a lot of teams last year. I think Zion Branch being potentially fully healthy and getting out on the field this year is a big addition. So yes, I would say everything defensively is trending positively. Certainly not going to sit here and tell you, yeah, they're going to shut down every tight end. I mean, that they've got to prove it on the field. But I know that defensively, USC is going to feel better about where they stand in all facets starting this season compared to where they were starting in 2022.
Yeah, they got more size to play guys at that position that would cover the tight end this year compared to last year.
Well, we're going to find out maybe in the first 6 games, unless they're going to hide stuff to prevent the unbalanced second half, which is vastly more challenging, but we will eventually figure it out. Question 4 from Romy. I understand there are a couple of silent signings, quote unquote. Has the panel heard their names? Just a yes or no answer for you, with the exception of the resident lawyer. Need a paragraph's reply from CA. Comment?
Well, there's no signings at this point, right? I mean, the idea would be commits, and I think we're going to find out here in the next week who some of those guys probably were.
So is Romy asking for a lot from me, or is Romy giving me a hard time?
He says,
I don't understand.
He says just a yes or no answer for you, with the exception of the resident lawyer. I'm not a lawyer. Erik isn't. Marc isn't. That would leave you. And then he says a paragraph's reply from CA. That's your initials. So
yeah,
take it for what you want.
Well, here's what I'm going to say then. I'm not going to give you a paragraph reply to that question, but the next overly long reply that I give on this show, which will probably be the first question of next week, I donate that to Romy.
All right. And the final question from B. Davis in Irvine, California. Panel, would you guys be in favor of USC and Lincoln Riley adopting the Clemson way of handling recruiting and commits, meaning no silent commits, and those who commit are not allowed to take any more visits? How do you feel about that?
Absolutely not. No. You don't want to. That's a little bit too draconian for today's college football player, today's high school recruit. They know that they have too many options. Playing the hard ass, I don't know if that works today.
I agree with Marc. Maybe at some point I felt that if you make a commitment, you live by the commitment. But I've come to the conclusion that the earlier the commitment, probably the less solid it is, because I'm so used to guys decommitting. And I think the prevailing feeling amongst many coaches out there, from my understanding and from what's been reported, although they appreciate a commitment, they don't get all fired up as much as maybe the recruits do, and the reaction by coaches at the time, because they all know there's so many decommitments now. The only commitment that counts is the one that's signed in December or February. Any further comments on this?
I mean, it's always felt like a power trip, right? When you tell someone you have to do this right now and you can't do anything else. There's so many things that come up in recruitment and things that can change. And if you don't have that kind of back and forth relationship between the staff and the player to where you can address those things and figure out the best path forward, it feels unnecessarily one-sided, where I'm going to tell you what to do and you have to do this. And it just, it's one of those things that I know rubs a lot of players the wrong way. There's for sure some that buy into it and they end up at those schools and they like, that process and doing it that way. But I think that the back and forth, the communication, the two-sided nature of recruiting means that that's a tough thing to do and still get interest from the players that you want to talk to during the process.
Okay, well, a reminder, if you have a question or comments for our panel, go to the WeAreSC members message board and click on the thread that pertains to Inside the Trojans Huddle, viewer or listener questions. Well, that'll do it for Tuesday's edition of Inside the Trojans Huddle. So until next Tuesday, a big thank you again to our great panelists, Marc Kulkin, Chris Arledge, and Erik McKinney. And a special thank you for all of you who are watching or listening to Inside the Trojans Huddle. Don't forget to click on the subscribe button and like button. We greatly appreciate that. Have yourself a great week. And until then, this is your moderator, Greg Katz, reminding all of you to fight on, everybody.